East Ayrshire Child Protection Committee, 100 Stories, Child Sexual Exploitation. East Ayrshire Child Protection Committee. Child Sexual Exploitation. 100 Stories. East Ayrshire Child Protection Committee, 100 Stories, Child Sexual Exploitation. East Ayrshire Child Protection Committee. Child protection committees are locally based, interagency strategic partnerships responsible for the design, development, publication, distribution, dissemination, implementation, embedding and evaluation of all child protection policy and practice across the public, private and wider voluntary/third sectors in their local authority area. In East Ayrshire, the Child Protection Committee is a partnership between East Ayrshire Council, NHS Ayrshire and Arran, Police Scotland, Scottish Children's Reports Administration, SCI, Crown Office and Procurator Fiscal Service, Scottish Fire and Rescue Service and the Third Sector. The core functions of the East Ayrshire Child Protection Committee, EACP, relate to strategic planning, continuous improvement, public information and communication. The committee operates within the framework of the original guidance on the operation of child protection committees in Scotland, Scottish Executive, 2005, and as revised in the National Guidance for Child Protection in Scotland, Scottish Government, 2014. The CPC have strategic oversight and responsibility for all aspects of child protection and have prioritised the following key areas for 2017-2020. Neglect, Internet safety, and safeguarding. Themes include child sexual exploitation, CSE, human, child, trafficking, forced marriage, female genital mutilation, FGM, suicide, self-harm, prevent, counter-terrorism, lesbian, gay, bisexual and transgender plus, LGBT plus, and multi-agency public protection arrangements, MAPA. East Ayrshire Child Protection Committee, 100 Stories, Child Sexual Exploitation. Child Sexual Exploitation, 100 Stories. Child sexual exploitation is considered to be one of the key priorities of the East Ayrshire Child Protection Committee, EACP. As part of the EACP's role of communication, planning and information sharing, a conference on child sexual exploitation was organised for the partnership. The conference had speakers representing East Ayrshire Council, Police Scotland, Current Research, and the guest speaker was Sammy Woodhouse, one of the young girls from Rotherham who inspired the film, The Three Girls. The conference was full to capacity and representatives from health, social work, community partnerships, third sector, education, housing and Police Scotland attended. As part of the event, a collection of 100 stories of child sexual exploitation, CSE, were gathered. And each story was placed on a separate card then suspended like bunting around the conference hall so that participants could read each card in turn. The stories represented all the various types of people and children who have been involved in CSE, showing that any child, from any walk of life, can be caught up in CSE. Many of the stories were gathered from organizations such as Barnados, NSPCC, Real Lives, One Voice etc. Stories also were gathered from significant case reviews, SCRs, from across the country, the J. Rotherham Report and stories from parents. More than half the stories were gathered from real people who had told their story personally to the East Ayrshire Multi-Agency Learning and Development Officer, who compiled the 100 stories. Some of the people mentioned in the stories are now adults who had never before shared their story. One adult said he had always been ashamed of his story and so had never told anybody, but was now really happy for it to be shared in the 100 stories. His view was that if it could help just one person, then something good will have come from his own negative experience. East Ayrshire Child Protection Committee, 100 stories, child sexual exploitation. 13-year-old girl. Soon after my 13th birthday, a friend and I went one Saturday to a shopping centre in the nearest town. None of us had what you'd call a boyfriend then. During this trip, a couple of Asian lads called Niv and Jay starting talking to us. They were friendly and good-looking, but a few years older than us. We started to go into town by bus to meet them on Saturdays, then on some weekday evenings too. My parents worked until late and I had more freedom to stay out. I found it easy to tell lies to my parents about where I was going, and at this stage I didn't know they were bad people. They introduced us to older men, one of them being Tariq. I liked his confidence and the fact that the others seemed to look up to him. For a while, Tariq was nice, and would give me rides in his car, gifts, drinks and cigarettes. He encouraged me to try drugs, telling me I was old enough. Then suddenly he changed. One night, after we'd been out drinking, Tariq dragged me into an alley and raped me. I was so confused by what had happened and terrified by his threats that I let him sell me on for sex with other men. I never thought of myself as a prostitute, but looking back, that's exactly what I was. It is only now that I can see that, much as I wanted to believe Tariq had feelings for me, he didn't. He just wanted to make money out of me. I wanted it to stop, of course I did, but I believed that there was no one I could tell. The gang had convinced me that they were the only people I had, and they said that if I ever told anybody about what was happening they would firebomb my house or rape my mother and make me watch. In the end, my mom found out. I'd left my mobile phone on the kitchen table. It rang and my mom picked it up. The man's voice on the other end disturbed her, so she checked my messages. Knowing something was wrong, my parents sat me down and asked what was going on, and it all came out. The police were called, statements taken, and Tariq was arrested. He denied everything, but the police didn't believe him. I can't say I hate Tariq. If anything, I pity him. I feel like he'll never do well in life. He'll always be an evil person. East Ayrshire Child Protection Committee, 100 stories, child sexual exploitation. East Ayrshire Child Protection Committee, 100 stories, child sexual exploitation. 12-year-old boy. I was 12 when I started to use the internet to find out more about my sexuality. I was confused because I found men attractive but felt too embarrassed to speak to my mom and dad. I was worried what their reaction would be if they thought I was gay. I used chat rooms to talk to men. It was nice to be able to talk openly about my feelings and not be interrogated. I soon got talking to Peter. Although he was a lot older than me, he was very nice and made me feel special. He made me feel confident about myself and helped me understand that What I was feeling was normal. He was also very interested in me and he looked nice in his picture. We started to flirt and he asked me to send photographs of myself. He flattered me and told me that I had a nice body. He wanted to be my boyfriend. I soon began sending naked photographs of myself and he got me to pose in sexual positions. He told me that he loved me and I thought that I loved him. We soon started to meet up. Peter traveled quite far on the train to meet me. We would go to nice places and he bought me presents like an iPod and paid for me to have my ear pierced. He took me to stay in hotel rooms and at first it felt nice. We started to have sex. And that was when things changed. Peter wanted to do things that I felt uncomfortable with. When I refused, he became violent and threatened to post my naked photographs on the internet. I had to do what he wanted. I was too ashamed to get help. I started to miss school and not look after myself, hoping that he would not want to touch me if I made myself ugly. My parents tried to talk to me but I just hit out and started to smash things up in the house. One day Peter took me to a hotel to make me have sex. I was upset when I got there and someone must have been worried about me because they called the police. Peter was arrested. I would like to meet that person and thank them because I couldn't see a way out. And they helped me. East Ayrshire Child Protection Committee, 100 Stories, Child Sexual Exploitation. East Ayrshire Child Protection Committee, 100 Stories, Child Sexual Exploitation. Moving to a new school was a big deal for me. I was at last able to leave behind the torment dished out to me by the kids who made fun of me because of my weight. New school, new start. I tried hard to make friends over the next year but I still felt like an outsider. I ended up skipping school when I could get away with it and that was how I met Dan. Dan understood me. He knew how unhappy I was. He took me under his wing and told me not to worry about that fact. He was a lot older than me. What mattered was how we felt when we were together. He did warn me not to mention it to my mom though, as she wouldn't understand. He liked that I was a bit bigger than other girls. He made me laugh and feel good about myself. We used to hang out with his mates and they spoiled me, buying me drinks and cigarettes. In the early days we had such a great time. Finally I felt wanted. The fun stopped when he invited one of his mates to have a threesome. He told me it was the least I could do, considering his mate had put on the party. Over the next few months, things got worse and he became abusive, hitting me if I refused to have sex with his mates. He would lock me in hotel rooms and I would to wait to see who came through the door. I felt so alone and I hated myself for wanting Dan no matter what. I couldn't speak to my mum about it. She didn't understand and she was never around. Anyway, I couldn't trust anyone at school either. I felt so low that I started to cut myself. Because the pain I felt when I did it made me feel better. My lifeline came when one of my friends noticed the cuts on my arm and told a teacher. Telling someone about Dan and his mates was the best thing I did. Dan was the adult and I was kid. He knew I was vulnerable and he took advantage of me. I can see that now. Dan and his mates have been locked up and will be spending the next 8 years in prison. If my story saves just one person from experiencing what I went through, I know some good will have come from my experience. East Ayrshire Child Protection Committee, 100 Stories, Child Sexual Exploitation. East Ayrshire Child Protection Committee, 100 Stories, Child Sexual Exploitation. Linda Hartley survivor. Hartley was 17 when she started a relationship with Pasha, who was 20 years older than her. He was everything that she dreamed of in a man. He was sophisticated, Persian, erudite, cosmopolitan. He was fantastic and a great guy, and very clever. I felt really safe with him, she remembers. Before long, however, he became more possessive, and Hartley, who had moved into a flat with him, felt isolated from her friends and family. I was hooked. I was dependent. But something wasn't right. It was like my life was just off center. Every time I mentioned going to college, restarting my A-levels, it would create such an argument. Hartley was an attractive young woman and was spotted by model scouts. She started traveling abroad for work, but the situation at home deteriorated. Hartley remembers once, when she arrived outside the front door, she found herself locked out of the flat. On other occasions, Pasha turned up with a gun, asked detectives to follow her, threatened that she would end up in a wheelchair and that he would run her over. It got really nutty. It was non-stop. Hartley lived in fear, until one day she found herself locked in the bathroom with a knife, cutting her hand. I realized I had to get help. I had to do something. This wasn't me. Eventually she managed to break the bond and cut Pasha out of her life. 20 years later, she has written a book and is open to sharing her experience to help others. East Ayrshire Child Protection Committee, 100 Stories, Child Sexual Exploitation. East Ayrshire Child Protection Committee, 100 Stories, Child Sexual Exploitation. Emma's story. I was just hanging around at the park with my mates when I met Dave. I'd seen him driving past a few times. He was really good looking. I couldn't believe it when he came over to talk to me. He offered to take me for a drive in his car, said it was cooler than hanging around the swings with my friends all night. We had a laugh and got on really well. He said he really liked me and that I was really different to the other girls he knew. He started to turn up every night. He'd take me out in his car. We'd go out for pizza or we'd just sit and chat. Dave was so generous, he was always buying me presents like a top-up card for my phone, and he said that I could get in touch with him if I needed to. My friends were really jealous. I started hanging round with them less and less, because I had so much more fun with Dave. He'd text me and email me all the time. He was really interested in what I was doing and who I was with. My mum was being really nosy. She was always wondering who I was texting and why I was on the internet so much. She was so overprotective, having a go at me just because I was a bit late home. I really liked Dave, he understood me. And he was always buying me new things, new clothes and jewelry. My mum said I was acting different, but I just thought I was a bit more grown up. Dave liked me to dress a certain way but I didn't mind, I just liked to keep him happy. He took me to really cool parties with all his friends. They were all really nice and I had a really good time. Dave even gave me beer and vodka, but he said it didn't matter. He said I was mature for my age. He said it would make me have a better time. My parents used to go mad when I didn't come home until the morning after, but I didn't care. I wanted to spend all my time with Dave. Sometimes I'd stay at Dave's for a few days. We'd just hang around his flat. Mum even reported me missing to the police, but I thought she was just overreacting. But after a while things started to change. Dave started to get really jealous if I spoke to anyone else or wanted to see my friends. He said they didn't understand me like he did and they didn't really want to spend time with me. But he bought me a brand new phone, but only he had the new number and he kept my old SIM card. I thought because he loved me so much that he just wanted me all to himself. But one day Dave asked me to do something for him. He said he owed his friend some money, but if I was nice to this friend he would let him off. I wasn't sure what he meant, but something didn't seem right. Then I realized he wanted me to have sex with him. I didn't want to, but Dave said it would be okay. He said it would really help him out, and I just wanted to make him happy. It was East Ayrshire Child Protection Committee, 100 stories, child sexual exploitation. Awful. I just cried and was so relieved when it was over. But it didn't stop there. Dave changed. He became really aggressive and I was so scared that he would hurt me that I just did what he said. I had to drink to block out what was happening. I didn't know what to do. Dave said there was no point telling anyone. They said they wouldn't believe me and I would get in trouble for making things up. Things got worse and worse. I felt worthless and so alone. Dave started getting violent. He even punched me in the face when I asked why he was being like this. I couldn't believe that someone I thought loved me could turn into a monster and treat me like this. I didn't want to go to the police. I was scared. I thought they'd say it was my fault, and I was scared what Dave would do if he found out. But Mom called them for me. The next day, an officer came to my house. She was really nice. She didn't judge me. She was really understanding. She told me none of this was my fault, and I was the victim of child sexual exploitation and they would help me. My mum felt really bad that she hadn't realized what was happening. She said she knew something wasn't right but never imagined things could get as bad as they were. East Ayrshire Child Protection Committee, 100 stories, child sexual exploitation. John told me he was 23, but the police told me later he was 44. We became friends because he used to buy us all cigarettes and drinks and that. He let us go round his flat to hang out. We knew he was trying to get with us but we just led him on to get stuff out of him. One night, he tried to touch me and kiss my mate and we panicked. It kicked off and we had a massive row in the car when we made him take us home. I thought I was in control of the situation, but when he got angry, I realized I wasn't. I called the police later that night. My friend didn't want to. Said we would get in trouble, but I was scared by how angry he'd got. I was worried what my dad would say too, but I didn't know what else to do. During their investigation, the police discovered that John had befriended several other girls, and made illegal sexual advances to them. John was found guilty and sent to prison for 5 years. East Ayrshire Child Protection Committee, 100 stories, child sexual exploitation. East Ayrshire Child Protection Committee, 100 stories, child sexual exploitation. I met Joe when I was 11. He worked at the stables I used to hang around at. I really wanted to ride horses, like I used to see on the films I'd watch on a Sunday afternoon. Joe let me do that. He was also the first person that bought me cigarettes, and I thought smoking was really cool but did not want my mum and dad finding out. I got on with my parents and sister well, but Joe let me sort of do what I wanted. I suppose I wanted to grow up quick and Joe made me feel like an adult. But I wasn't an adult, I was a kid, you know. I still find that hard to accept because I've realized just how much of a good job at manipulating and brainwashing me into thinking I was his equal. He showed me pornographic magazines to start with, and then it went on from there. He'd do truth/dare with me, and it always seemed to end up with him touching me and doing stuff. But I'd kind of try and forget about it because he would buy me records, cigs, food, trainers, magazines, and let me ride the horses whenever I wanted to. It was like they were mine. It really messed my head up later in life. I blamed myself for taking the items off him. It was like he'd bought me. I blamed myself for taking the items off him. It was like he'd bought me. I kept all this quiet about all this for about 15 years, mainly because I didn't want to admit to myself what had happened, never mind admitting to anyone else. I was ashamed, felt guilty, and just hated myself for it all. But I found someone to talk to, someone like me that helped me challenge my own thinking. I got so much from talking to him, and then others, until I found myself realizing that this wasn't my fault. I missed out on a good education when I was younger because of what was going on for me, so getting one now is really important, and I think I'm doing pretty well for myself now. I have a degree I worked really hard for, a good job, and I can finally talk about what happened. I'm not ashamed anymore because I know I have nothing to be ashamed about. I did nothing wrong. East Ayrshire Child Protection Committee, 100 stories, child sexual exploitation. East Ayrshire Child Protection Committee, 100 stories, child sexual exploitation. When I was 6, my dad was taken away from our house. My mum was an alcoholic with depression, and I know she took drugs too. My brothers and sisters were sent to live with other members of our family, and I have never been home since. I was moved around a lot and stayed with different people. When I was 15, I stopped seeing my mom completely and was taken into care. I was always in trouble, running away, drinking, and taking drugs. I stole things too so I could get money. Me and my mates would ask random blokes to buy us cigarettes or vodka. Whatever we could get. I started to hurt myself. I hated my life. I would cut my arms or take lots of painkillers. Me and my mates hung around with blokes that were older than us, and I slept with some of them, even though I didn't really want to. Even though I was only 15, groups of older blokes would still try and get me and my mates to go back to hotel rooms with them. If they bought us drinks, then we would a lot of the time. When I was drunk, I never really thought about what I was doing. I told the police about a guy who attacked me once. I got a lot of stick from my mates and other guys for doing this. A social worker is helping me now. I actually really like her. She answers her phone to me, even when I ring really early or late. My criminal record means that I can't become a police officer or social worker like I wanted. But I am trying hard at college now and have done some volunteering for young people. I want other young girls to know that they need to be careful. I was good at sport at school. And my family was what you would call normal. East Ayrshire Child Protection Committee, 100 Stories, Child Sexual Exploitation. East Ayrshire Child Protection Committee, 100 Stories, Child Sexual Exploitation. I met Nick on the internet and thought he was in his mid-20s. We got on really well and agreed to meet up. As soon as I saw him, I knew something was wrong. He looked about 50. I'd invited him to my house when my parents were out and it was clear he was expecting sex or something. I felt like I had led him on and didn't know how to say no, so I agreed to have sex with him. I immediately regretted it and told him I didn't want to see or speak to him anymore. But he wouldn't leave me alone and kept trying to get in touch. I didn't know what to do, so I told a family friend and the police got involved. The police identified the man as a local businessman. When they seized his computer, they discovered that he had been chatting to other underage young people, telling them he liked young girls. He frequently tried to meet up with the people he chatted with, for the explicit purposes of having sex with them, even though he knew they were not yet 16. East Ayrshire Child Protection Committee, 100 Stories, Child Sexual Exploitation. East Ayrshire Child Protection Committee, 100 Stories, Child Sexual Exploitation. My mum and dad drank a lot and take drugs. My dad used to hit mum and me sometimes. We kept kicking him out and moving house, but he always managed to find us and start causing problems again. When I was 12, a boy at my school tried to get me to have sex with him and hurt me. I told people about it, but then I got scared and didn't want anything to happen about it. So he got away with it. At 13 I got a new boyfriend who was a lot older than me. We had sex. He said he loved me. I started cutting myself, not eating, and I took lots of my mom's medicines for her depression. Eventually social services took me to a hospital and I stayed there for few months. I used to run away from there a lot, meeting up with mates and that. I had sex with some of them sometimes, or friends of theirs. A lot of them were older than me. I smoked a lot of weed and drank as much as I could to get off my head. Sometimes when I woke up, I didn't know where I was or who I was with, even though we had just had sex. One man threatened to hurt my friends if I didn't have sex with him. He told the police he thought I was 16, but he knew I wasn't. Paige was referred to a specialist child sexual exploitation team. They earned her trust and helped her move to a new area, away from the threats and bad influences. She told them what happened to her and they were able to identify and prosecute the people who committed offences against her and her friends. East Ayrshire Child Protection Committee, 100 Stories, Child Sexual Exploitation. East Ayrshire Child Protection Committee, 100 Stories, Child Sexual Exploitation. My daughter Elizabeth was 13 years old when it started. She was a really well-behaved girl. We had a fantastic mother-daughter relationship. She has had a stable home life and I have always had clear boundaries for what is acceptable behavior. There was nothing to suggest that she would be in any danger. It started when Elizabeth was contacted through Facebook by a 20-year-old woman who she knew vaguely through a family connection. This person was able to gain Elizabeth's trust and used her influence to draw my daughter into meeting with her and then a wider group of young people. There were young teenagers aged 13 to 16 there, a lot of them came from troubled backgrounds. The group also included men and women aged up to their mid-20s. It seemed as though they had a power over Elizabeth. I realized that while she was with this group they were working on her, brainwashing her against me. It was clear that these young people were being controlled by the older adults, both men and women. I'd hacked into Elizabeth's Facebook account and saw the messages they would send her, manipulating her with emotional blackmail, veiled threats and saying horrible things about me. I would read messages demanding my daughter leave her home in the middle of the night to meet them. The first time my daughter went missing it was for 3 days. The group would meet together and drink and take drugs, and they had convinced my daughter to come along to one of their parties. I reported her missing to the police, and when they finally brought her back it was as though her personality had been completely transformed. It was like she had been replaced by this rude, aggressive girl. She would say things like, "They're my family. Not you, or you hate my friends but you don't even know them." Elizabeth started to go missing from home at least twice a week. I was out of my mind with worry. I'd report her missing to the police and eventually they'd find her with her friends and take her home, drunk, aggressive, fighting, sometimes threatening to kill me. It didn't matter what I did to keep her in the house, she would be gone, climbing out of windows, sneaking out when I was too tired to stay awake. Her attendance at school dropped. She would just walk straight out of school and go and meet the group. It is the control they had over her that frightens me the most. Elizabeth's appearance changed completely. The group would self-harm together as though it was a competition. They would take her out shoplifting. They even convinced her to file a police complaint for assault against me. The police had to investigate, which meant interviewing my other children and asking if I'd ever hurt them. The pain of having that happen to my family is still difficult to bear. I'd always had a good relationship with my daughter, but it was like she'd been cloned. I felt humiliated, powerless. I was working with specialist social workers and police officers to try and manage her behavior. They were questioning every part of my relationship with her, telling me what I should and shouldn't do as though I didn't already know how to be a good parent. East Ayrshire Child Protection Committee, 100 stories, child sexual exploitation. Then after about 7 months, Elizabeth came home having gone missing for 4 days. I knew instantly that something awful had happened. From the snippets of what we've learned since, during a party one of the men had given her drink and drugs until she passed out, then he raped her. That was a turning point. It was then that she realized that these people weren't her friends, but the control they had over her was still there. Gradually, with a lot of work by myself and social workers, we were able to distance my daughter from the influence of the group. Together we are helping her recover, but she has found it so difficult dealing with the guilt of what happened. It resulted in her taking an overdose. I'm just thankful that she survived without any lasting damage. East Ayrshire Child Protection Committee, 100 stories, child sexual exploitation. When Raj started to feel attracted to men, it seemed as though there was no one he could talk to. He went on Facebook and met Mike, a 20-year-old university student. After weeks of chatting online, Mike told Raj he was falling for him and said he'd like Raj to be his boyfriend. The conversation turned to sex and Mike said he'd love it if Raj sent him a naked picture. Raj sent several pictures. One morning Mike asked Raj if later that evening he'd use the webcam. When Raj hesitated, Mike told him that if he didn't do as he said, he'd send the naked pictures of Raj to Raj's family and friends. Raj didn't want to use the webcam but didn't want his parents finding out. He felt so sick that he couldn't face going back home after school. When the police found him, Raj couldn't talk about what happened because he didn't think the police would understand. The policewoman talked about her work as a lesbian and gay liaison officer. She then asked Raj if he was okay and Raj told her about Mike and the photos and webcam. The police investigated and a man living nearby was arrested. I was worried about what would happen but the police helped me make a statement. They put me in touch with a local group for gay and lesbian kids who gave me the confidence to talk to my parents. Okay, Dad's not great with it. He says I'm still his son and he loves me no matter what. East Ayrshire Child Protection Committee, 100 Stories, Child Sexual Exploitation. East Ayrshire Child Protection Committee, 100 Stories, Child Sexual Exploitation. Sophie's mum, Linda, has been known to a local violence against women service for a number of years because of the violence she has experienced from multiple partners. Sophie is a white British young woman and she was 13 years old when Linda met Ray. Ray, who was also white British, moved in with Linda and was violent towards both her and her children. Ray began to invite his friends around to the house. They, in turn, were abusive to Linda and her children. Following this, Ray offered Sophie as a sexual commodity to his friends on a regular basis and threatened Linda and Sophie with violence if Sophie did not comply. East Ayrshire Child Protection Committee, 100 Stories, Child Sexual Exploitation. East Ayrshire Child Protection Committee, 100 Stories, Child Sexual Exploitation. Tegan, a white British young woman, was sexually exploited from the age of 12 years old. From the age of 13, Tegan was taken by a Turkish man to a variety of parties across England that she reports were in nice houses and in some cases described as mansions. In these houses Tegan would be raped by several men, from a range of ethnicities, who were paying to use her. Tegan described a book being available with photographs and ages of all of the girls being sexually exploited by this particular group. Men could choose which girls they wanted. Tegan reported men paying those who were exploiting her up to £500 for an hour with her. Groups of men could also request one girl to share between them over a night, where the rape of the girl would be filmed. The operation involved men working the streets to pick up vulnerable girls, forming relationships with them by grooming them and then passing them on to the men who controlled the business. If Tegan ever refused to comply, she would be beaten and her family threatened. Following the abuse, Tegan took several overdoses, was placed in secure accommodation, and self-harmed by cutting and ligaturing sometimes on a daily basis. Tegan described the abuse that she experienced as serious and organized, and is unwilling to make a formal complaint for fear of repercussions from those involved in the operation. East Ayrshire Child Protection Committee, 100 Stories, Child Sexual Exploitation. East Ayrshire Child Protection Committee, 100 Stories, Child Sexual Exploitation. Sarida, a 17-year-old British Pakistani young woman, made an allegation of sexual abuse against a family member. As a result, she was threatened with a forced marriage. Sarida's family claim they want to remove her from the country to curb her wild behavior. Following these threats, Sarida began spending time with older males, described by professionals as Asian, and was moved to multiple locations by them. Sarida is now pregnant as a result of the sexual exploitation she has experienced. Family members have physically assaulted Sarida as a punishment for the pregnancy. East Ayrshire Child Protection Committee, 100 Stories, Child Sexual Exploitation. East Ayrshire Child Protection Committee, 100 Stories, Child Sexual Exploitation. Randall is a 15-year-old boy, of mixed ethnic heritage, and described by professionals as exploring his sexuality. He is said to be unaware of safe routes to meeting other gay young people. Professionals report Randall has been seen hanging around at bus stops. He has disclosed to professionals that he has been targeted by groups of men who are grooming him to exchange sex for alcohol, cigarettes and acceptance. Professionals are working with Randall to try to keep him away from areas of risk, but they are aware he continues to go missing and are unable to account for his whereabouts on all occasions. East Ayrshire Child Protection Committee, 100 Stories, Child Sexual Exploitation. East Ayrshire Child Protection Committee, 100 Stories, Child Sexual Exploitation. Rebecca is a 15-year-old black British girl, and has reported she was forced by a group of girls to have sex with a boy in the girls' toilets at their school, otherwise they would beat her up. The group of perpetrators were made up of 3 14-year-old girls and 1 14-year-old boy, all of whom were black British. One of the girls is described as the instigator of the assault. Another girl filmed the assault on her mobile phone. The assault took place as part of a pattern of ongoing bullying of Rebecca. She was anally raped by the 14-year-old boy. She had never had sex before this assault. East Ayrshire Child Protection Committee, 100 Stories, Child Sexual Exploitation. East Ayrshire Child Protection Committee, 100 Stories, Child Sexual Exploitation. Mitchell is a white British 17-year-old boy, and has been known to the youth offending service for several years. From the age of 12, Mitchell was seen spending time with white British men, some of whom were believed to be sexually exploiting young women in the local area. Some of these older males bought Mitchell trainers, taught him how to comb his hair in particular ways and how to speak to girls. The older men also introduced Mitchell to some of the girls that they were sexually exploiting. At one point, he was found locked in a garage where one of the older males had brought young female victims of abuse. Mitchell gradually became involved in the sexual exploitation of young women in the local area, and would pass them on to his older peers. East Ayrshire Child Protection Committee, 100 Stories, Child Sexual Exploitation. East Ayrshire Child Protection Committee, 100 Stories, Child Sexual Exploitation. John told me he was 23, but the police told me later he was 44. We became friends because he used to buy us all cigarettes and drinks and that. He let us go round his flat to hang out. We knew he was trying to get with us, but we just led him on to get stuff out of him. One night, he tried to touch me and kiss my mate and we panicked. It kicked off and we had a massive row in the car when we made him take us home. I thought I was in control of the situation, but when he got angry, I realized I wasn't. I called the police later that night. My friend didn't want to. Said we would get in trouble, but I was scared by how angry he'd got. I was worried what my dad would say too, but I didn't know what else to do. During their investigation, the police discovered that John had befriended several other girls, and made illegal sexual advances to them. John was found guilty and sent to prison for 5 years. East Ayrshire Child Protection Committee, 100 Stories, Child Sexual Exploitation. East Ayrshire Child Protection Committee, 100 Stories, Child Sexual Exploitation. I was good at sport at school. And my family was what you would call normal. I met Nick on the internet and thought he was in his mid-20s. We got on really well and agreed to meet up. As soon as I saw him, I knew something was wrong. He looked about 50. I'd invited him to my house when my parents were out and it was clear he was expecting sex or something. I felt like I'd led him on and didn't know how to say no, so I agreed to have sex with him. I immediately regretted it and told him I didn't want to see or speak to him anymore. But he wouldn't leave me alone and kept trying to get in touch. I didn't know what to do, so I told a family friend and the police got involved. The police identified the man as a local businessman. When they seized his computer, they discovered that he had been chatting to other underage young people, telling them he liked young girls. He frequently tried to meet up with the people he chatted with, for the explicit purposes of having sex with them, even though he knew they were not yet 16. East Ayrshire Child Protection Committee, 100 Stories, Child Sexual Exploitation. East Ayrshire Child Protection Committee, 100 Stories, Child Sexual Exploitation. I was babysat by my uncle when I was 12 every Thursday to let my mum and dad go out. I liked him cause he used to give me sweets and toys. One day he asked if I wanted the toys he had brought. It was a Matchbox car. I said yes, but instead of giving it to me, he said I had to do something for him to say thanks. He made me do something to him which was horrible. Then he gave me the car. He acted like nothing was wrong and asked me what car I wanted next week. He babysat me for a year every week before I said that I didn't need a babysitter to my mum and dad. He made me feel that it was my fault cause I owed him cause he was buying me stuff. I didn't tell my mum and dad because he was my dad's brother, and if they didn't believe me, then it would be worse. I also felt that I asked for it cause I wanted the car. He said it was good payment. I am still haunted by it. East Ayrshire Child Protection Committee, 100 Stories, Child Sexual Exploitation. East Ayrshire Child Protection Committee, 100 Stories, Child Sexual Exploitation. I had moved to a new area and school and I didn't know anybody. A girl asked me to hang out with her and she was nice. At the weekend we met up and she introduced me to some lads that were older and not from our school. One of them was really nice and we got chatting. The next week he was part of the group again and they had drink for us. He got me to drink more than I had drunk before and then he wanted to walk me home. I said no, but he came anyway with his friends following. He pushed me onto the bench in the park and started to have sex with me. I didn't want him to. His friends were there as well, watching and cheering him on. Afterwards, he put his arm round me and said I was his girl now. I didn't want to go out the next week, but my friend said it was okay and that's part of the group initiation and that I should be okay cause the worst was over. I went out and he came over to me and put his arm around me. He said now I was his girl, I could be with one of his friends and be safe cause I was his. I was so confused and scared. The other guy was so rough and I cried. My guy said it was okay, he would take care of me. I didn't want to go out again, but the guys met us from the school and text me all the time. I was scared they would come to the house. He said that's what friends in this gang do, look out for each other and help each other. He said that we should stick together and not talk to anybody else at the school. I didn't tell anybody, my friend said not to. East Ayrshire Child Protection Committee, 100 stories, child sexual exploitation. East Ayrshire Child Protection Committee, 100 stories, child sexual exploitation. Danny's story. Danny's family background is one of parental substance misuse, domestic violence and mental health issues. Danny and his 5 siblings were neglected, and when Danny was 7 he and his siblings were taken into care. Danny was placed in a separate foster placement to any of his siblings and eventually moved into a children's home because his behavior was deemed too difficult for foster carers to manage. Danny started to run away overnight when he was 9, started drinking alcohol and smoking cannabis when he was 10 and diagnosed with ADHD when he was 12. For a number of years Danny missed his parents and siblings but believes that no one got to know him well enough for him to trust them and tell them how he was feeling. I was just another kid in care, another kid in trouble. I've had that many social workers. I've lost count of them all. I've been moved from care home to care home and had that many people looking after me. After being placed in yet another children's home, Danny started to run away to be with a group of young people who took him to parties held by adults. After being given large amounts of alcohol and drugs, Danny was taken to a room where a number of men sexually assaulted him. Danny describes how he started to act out after this incident and smashed up his room in the children's home. Danny was moved to a secure unit, then after returning to a children's home was once again sexually exploited. After being introduced to adults by young people who lived with him, Danny felt like he had no control over what was happening to him and started to carry out increasingly violent criminal acts. No one ever asked him why he was doing what he was doing and if there was anything wrong. Danny wanted to tell someone what was happening to him but felt that there was no one there for him who he could to talk to. The police just thought I was a waste of space and got fed up of coming to look for me when I ran away. None of my social workers stayed around long enough to get to know me. I went to this project for kids in trouble with the law, but they just focused on all the things I did wrong. Who was I supposed to talk to? Who was I supposed to tell what was happening to me? Danny has recently committed a violent crime for which he was caught, is awaiting a court appearance and been told that he is likely to be sent to a youth offending institution, YOI. Up until his research interview, Danny had not told anyone about the sexual exploitation he experienced. There are no specialist projects in the local area to support children and young people who experience running away and CSE. Danny has agreed that the researcher can tell his youth offending team, YOT, worker, who Danny likes, what has happened to him so that the process of providing Danny with some support can begin. East Ayrshire Child Protection Committee, 100 Stories, Child Sexual Exploitation. East Ayrshire Child Protection Committee, 100 Stories, Child Sexual Exploitation. Sunny's Story. Part 1. Sunny was raised by her father. After Sunny's father remarried, her younger siblings were born. Although Sunny was not close to her stepmother, she was happy at home, had friends she enjoyed spending time with and was working hard at school. After a long illness, Sunny's father died when she was 14. Sunny was devastated and felt like her world had been ripped apart. She continued to live with her stepmother and siblings, but Sunny's stepmother's behavior towards Sunny became physically and emotionally abusive. One of Sunny's siblings copied this abusive behavior and her home life became very difficult. Sunny began to feel depressed and her school work was affected. Through friends, Sunny met an older white British male who asked for her mobile number and she started spending time with him at his flat. Sunny began to think of this older male as her boyfriend. Because of how she was treated at home, Sunny wanted to feel loved and to be somewhere where she felt cared for. Sunny started to run away to spend days at a time with her boyfriend. When she was with him, she just wanted to cuddle up to him and feel safe, but he wanted more than this and pushed her to have sex with him. Sunny's relationship with her boyfriend caused problems within Sunny's wider family and community. Sunny started to feel more estranged and not wanted, which, in turn, pushed her to spend more time with her boyfriend. East Ayrshire Child Protection Committee, 100 Stories, Child Sexual Exploitation. Part 2. Eventually Sunny's school contacted a specialist project working with children and young people who experience CSE, as they had a number of concerns about Sunny. A project worker from the specialist project started to see Sunny at school. At first Sunny did not want to discuss her relationship with her boyfriend. However, after building a trusting relationship with her project worker, Sunny disclosed that she had a number of problems at home and within her community that related to her relationship with her boyfriend. Through work with her project worker, Sunny started to understand that her relationship with her boyfriend was an exploitative one. Sunny ended the relationship with her boyfriend, but, by this time, her stepmother had thrown Sunny out of home and her extended family were not speaking to her because of the shame she had brought upon them through running away and having an relationship with a white British male. Sunny was living in temporary accommodation and felt lonely with no family, boyfriend or community to turn to. Sunny's project worker continued to support Sunny through this time and also acted as an advocate on Sunny's behalf, meeting with Sunny's grandfather with the aim of getting him to understand that Sunny had felt lonely and isolated after her father's death and that she had been a victim of abuse through no fault of her own. As an older male, Sunny's grandfather was influential within his family and community. It was hoped that if he could understand the reasons for Sunny's running away and sexual exploitation, he could support the process of facilitating Sunny to have contact with her family and community, which would go some way to alleviating her loneliness and isolation. At first Sunny's grandfather was not receptive to considering that Sunny was not at fault. But over time and a lot of hard work from Sunny's project worker, his attitude has changed. And Sunny has started to spend time with her family and slowly begun to be reintegrated into her local community. East Ayrshire Child Protection Committee, 100 Stories, Child Sexual Exploitation. Jimmy's story. When Jimmy was 13, he realized he was sexually attracted to men, which troubled him as he knew that being gay would not be accepted by his family and community, and that he would be expected to marry a woman and have children. When Jimmy was 14, he got to know an older male in his mid-20s who was the son of another traveler family on site. This man invited Jimmy to his caravan where they drank alcohol and smoked cannabis. One night the man asked Jimmy if he had ever had sex with a girl. The man made a joke about Jimmy preferring boys and then said there was nothing wrong with that. The man's response stunned Jimmy, as he had not thought that there was anyone who thought that being into boys was acceptable. One night when Jimmy was round at this man's caravan, he saw a pornographic magazine featuring men. The man saw Jimmy looking at the magazine and told him to have a look. Jimmy did, and the man told Jimmy that he was better looking than any of the men in the magazine, and why didn't they take photos of Jimmy? So Jimmy took his top off and the two of them fooled around with the camera on the man's phone. At one point, the man grabbed Jimmy and kissed him roughly on the lips. This frightened Jimmy, who put his top back on and ran back to his caravan. Jimmy tried to avoid the man as he was having conflicting feelings about what was happening. On one level he was frightened because he knew that this man should not have kissed him because of how others within his family and community would react, but the kiss had also excited him. After a few days, Jimmy went back to the man's caravan. The man said he had missed Jimmy coming round and gave him a beer. They watched a film and smoked weed and drank. Nothing was said about the kiss. After a while, when he was drunk and stoned, Jimmy leant over and kissed the man on the lips. Jimmy and the man embarked upon a sexual relationship. At first Jimmy enjoyed the sex, but then the man's demands changed and he became violent. The man started making up excuses to take Jimmy off-site to help him with a job, but this was an excuse to get Jimmy away from the site. At first Jimmy was excited by leaving the site with the man he thought of as his boyfriend, but he found that the man had arranged to meet other men outside of the traveler community in a hotel, and they were expecting to have sex with Jimmy and a couple of other boys that they had brought along with them. Jimmy did not want to have sex with these men and said so. The man he thought of as his boyfriend took Jimmy into the bathroom and said that if he did not do what he was told, he would show his father the photographs he had of Jimmy on his phone. The man then calmed down and told Jimmy, while stroking his hair, that he owed these men money and that they would harm him if Jimmy did not do what they wanted. After being forced to have sex with a number of men, Jimmy changed. He started to get into a lot of fights and generally cause a lot of problems at home with his family. Jimmy wanted to tell someone what was being done to him but felt trapped, and that there was no one he could go to, as being gay was viewed as unacceptable. He had a lot of arguments with his father, who was violent towards Jimmy, to teach him to respect. Jimmy continued to meet the man in his caravan because he was too frightened to stop doing so. East Ayrshire Child Protection Committee, 100 Stories, Child Sexual Exploitation. One day the man came to Jimmy's father and said that he had work that he wanted Jimmy to help him with and that Jimmy would get paid. Jimmy had a feeling what the work would involve and told his father that he did not want to go. His father told him not to be so stupid and to go. Jimmy could not face being forced to have sex with a number of men again and jumped out of the car when they were driving through the city center. East Ayrshire Child Protection Committee, 100 Stories, Child Sexual Exploitation. Freddie's story. Freddie, one of 6 children, was singled out by his father and physically and emotionally abused. To avoid his home situation, Freddie spent time with his older siblings and other young people out in the local area. When he was 9, Freddie started to run away from home to be alone. I used to just run off and be on my own. I went to this wood and this field. I just wanted to be on me own. When Freddie was 10, he got to know a 20-year-old male who invited him to his house. Freddie started to spend time at this male's house when he ran away from home. At first we used to play on his Xbox, but then he started giving me booze and touching me. And that. Freddie was taken into care and lived in a residential school for 2 years. He often ran away and, at first, stayed with this older male. However, this older male's sexual advances became more and more forceful. During one episode of running away, the adult male raped Freddie. Freddie continued to run away after this incident but spent time on his own as he had done when he was younger and had first started to run away. East Ayrshire Child Protection Committee, 100 Stories, Child Sexual Exploitation. East Ayrshire Child Protection Committee, 100 Stories, Child Sexual Exploitation. Nicole's story. Nicole's life changed when a male relative started to sexually abuse her and invited his friends to do the same. He came round to me house when me mum and dad were at work. He forced me to give him a blowjob. He hit me when I refused to do so and grabbed me round the throat. I was really scared and felt sick afterwards. He told me to keep it quiet and said that no one would believe me if I told anyone what had happened. And he was right, no one would believe me. Things like that didn't happen in my family. It would be my word against his and no one would believe me. After a while, Nicole's relative forced her to have oral sex with his friends. Nicole became very depressed and started to self-harm. Nicole's relative went on a family holiday and she ran away just before he returned as she dreaded the exploitation resuming. After 2 weeks of having a break from him, I felt like I couldn't bear it all starting again. It was the beginning of the summer holidays, so I was off school and I knew he, her cousin, would be round when me mum and dad were at work, so the day before he came back from holiday, I ran away. I planned it all out. I took some stuff with me, clothes and that, and some money that I'd saved up, and I went to me friends. I'd never done anything like that before, so me mum and dad were really worried, but I didn't understand why they hadn't noticed the change in me, as a result of being sexually exploited. I was quiet when I didn't used to be. I wasn't doing so well at school. I was so unhappy, but they, her parents, didn't notice any of it, and I felt angry about it. I wanted them to notice me and to see that something was wrong and to stop what my relative was doing to me. Nicole returned home and the following day a police officer came to see her. The police came to speak with me and asked me why I was running away. Like I could really say my relative's making me suck his dick and his mate's dick. It just wasn't going to happen. Nicole continued to run away, sometimes staying with friends and sometimes staying out all night on her own or with other young people. I ran away so me, relative, couldn't find me and couldn't make me do all that stuff. There was no one to help me with it all, so all I could think to do was run away and be somewhere where he couldn't find me. East Ayrshire Child Protection Committee, 100 Stories, Child Sexual Exploitation. East Ayrshire Child Protection Committee, 100 Stories, Child Sexual Exploitation. Lily's story. Lily started to run away because she did not like living in the children's home. It was horrible. The staff, the rules, the kids. It was like a prison. Lily experienced sexual exploitation on a number of occasions when she ran away from children's homes. On one occasion, Lily's friend persuaded Lily to run away with her to spend time with a male who was unknown to Lily. This male lived with his mother and did not want her to know that Lily and her friend were with him in his bedroom. He did sexual stuff to me as well. And, that time, I really wanted to go home, to the children's home, and I just wanted to turn me phone on and ring the home and be like, will you come and get me? But I couldn't move. And then I thought, I'll get up and I'll run downstairs to his mom and say, look, I'm going home, but I couldn't do anything. Lily described another incident where she ran away and experienced sexual exploitation. I was just walking out, after running away, and someone shouted, "Oi, come up here and I'll give you some free drink or something, and I don't know what it is, but you just go to be with the person who has offered the free alcohol, and I don't know why." What happened that time was like it was a house share, and I sort of knew one of them, who lived in the shared house, and I didn't know this other person. This person, the one that Lily sort of knew, got me really drunk until the point that you don't know what you're doing. And after he did whatever he did to me, we went into this like communal living room and I fell all over the settee, and then it got really serious because then the other guy, who Lily did not know at all, came in, and he was 25, and the guy I was with was like, get out now to me, but this other guy was like, oh no, she's staying with me because you're bladdered, you can't move or get out, and then, after further sexual assault has taken place, you're like, oh my god, but still you can't move and you're just laid there going, oh my god. It happened a lot, that stuff. East Ayrshire Child Protection Committee, 100 Stories, Child Sexual Exploitation. East Ayrshire Child Protection Committee, 100 Stories, Child Sexual Exploitation. Faye's story. When Faye was 12, her mother started throwing her out of home. Faye was very confused by her mother's behavior and didn't know what to do when her mother threw her out. Sometimes Faye was able to stay the night with a friend, but this was not always possible. One evening, with nowhere to go, Faye sat on a swing in the local park worrying about what she was going to do. A man who lived in the local area sat on the swing next to Faye. He asked me if I was all right. He could tell I was unhappy and asked me what was wrong. I told him me mum had said I couldn't go home that night and that I didn't know where to go. He knew all the right things to say. He said that he knew me brother, who was in prison, and that he, Faye's brother, wouldn't like to see me with nowhere to stay. He said he knew what it was like to be chucked out of home 'cause his dad used to do it to him, and that I could stay at his house. I now know I was stupid to go to his house, but, at the time, he seemed really nice and like he understood how I was feeling. I thought 'cause he said he was a friend of my brother's, it would be all right to go to his house. The man made Faye some food and then told her that he needed something from her and forced her to have oral sex. Looking back on it, I didn't feel right about it, but I didn't know anything about sex then. Faye continued to stay with this man when she had nowhere to stay. He basically told me that nothing is for nothing and that I had to pay my way in some way. East Ayrshire Child Protection Committee, 100 Stories, Child Sexual Exploitation. East Ayrshire Child Protection Committee, 100 Stories, Child Sexual Exploitation. I lived with my mum and dad, but my mum had a son from a previous marriage who lived with his dad. He used to come and stay with us for the weekend once a month. He was 17. When I was 8, he came into my bed one night and said he couldn't sleep, so we cuddled in. This happened a few times. He always brought me stuff and gave me sweets which we hid from mum and dad cause they didn't let me have too many sweets. One night I woke up and he was on top of me and touching me. I didn't like it and said no. And to get off me. He just laughed and said that it was okay and that he would tell my mum about the sweets and him being in my bed. I was scared but didn't want to get into trouble from my mum. He told me my mum would be disappointed in me. He made me feel it was all my fault. East Ayrshire Child Protection Committee, 100 Stories, Child Sexual Exploitation. East Ayrshire Child Protection Committee, 100 Stories, Child Sexual Exploitation. Casey. Casey went to a private school which her mum and dad struggled to pay for. They always went on about the sacrifices they made for her to get a good education. Casey's uncle began to abuse her when she was 12, and when he visited the house or he took her out in the car. Casey at 13 said no to him and said she was going to tell her mum. Her uncle gave money to Casey's mum and dad to help pay for the school as Casey was his favorite niece. Casey was told by him that he had paid for her and that now she couldn't tell because she would get into trouble, and also her mum and dad would have to pay the money back. Casey was sexually exploited by her uncle for 4 more years till she left the school. Casey said, "I felt like I had no choice, he had paid for me, I couldn't do anything about it." East Ayrshire Child Protection Committee, 100 Stories, Child Sexual Exploitation. East Ayrshire Child Protection Committee, 100 Stories, Child Sexual Exploitation. My mum had a boyfriend who she loved and couldn't see what he was really like. He abused me a lot when mum was on the night shift at the hospital. I got pregnant. I was 15 and he persuaded my mum that I was a slag and that he had seen me with loads of guys. I wouldn't say who the father was, but inside I wanted to scream that it was him, but he said I wouldn't be believed. I got really angry and kept running away, so in the end I was sent to a home for young mums and their babies. When the baby was born, she was taken away from me. I cried for a month. I then went to a hostel and met a man who seemed to really care for me. He said he would look after me. He said he loved me. He asked me to move in with him, which was better than at the hostel. He was lovely, but he had some horrible friends. He went out one night and left me with his friend and he wanted to have sex with me. I didn't want to, but he did it anyway. I told my boyfriend, but he said that it was good of me cause his friend had been through a hard time and needed to have some love from a woman. I was so confused. I thought he would be furious with his friend. The friend came again the next week and I didn't struggle this time. My boyfriend said that His friend had given him some money as a thank you, and this was great cause he had paid out a lot for me staying with him. He said he had another friend that would give money if I had sex with him as well. I really didn't want to but had to. East Ayrshire Child Protection Committee, 100 Stories, Child Sexual Exploitation. East Ayrshire Child Protection Committee, 100 Stories, Child Sexual Exploitation. I was in the choir and really liked it. I wanted the lead part, so was working hard for this. The choir leader was a good laugh. He asked some of us round to his house for extra practice. He had some beer and we all had some and had a laugh. He asked me to help him get more beer from the garage. In the garage he touched me and made my hand touch him as well. Back in the house, he acted as though it hadn't happened. A few weeks later he asked some of us round again. We had some beers and then he asked me to the garage again. He made me get on my knees and he stuck his knob in my mouth and held my head to it to move up and down. I was stuck and shocked and didn't know what to do. After he said that I had got the lead part. When we went back to the house he told everyone that I had the lead part. When he dropped me off home he told my mum and dad that I had the lead part and he was proud of me. Mum and dad were so pleased and proud of me and phoned my gran to tell her. That was the start. East Ayrshire Child Protection Committee, 100 Stories, Child Sexual Exploitation. East Ayrshire Child Protection Committee, 100 Stories, Child Sexual Exploitation. I was playing a football game online. I had worked up a great score. One of the friends I had met online chatted to me and kept saying how well I was doing. We got really friendly and over the next few months he chatted to me. He was my age and sent me a photo of him playing football. He asked if we could meet up. I went to his house and his big brother was there. He gave me some beer while we were waiting for my friend to come back. After some beers, I realized that there was no friend but that this was the friend, this big brother. He made me do things to him that were horrible. I ran as fast as I could when I got out of the house. He chatted to me again online when I got home and said that I couldn't tell anybody cause he had taken photos of me in his house doing that to him and he would tell the school and all my friends and my mum and dad. I did tell my mum, because I was so upset and she noticed that I was really upset. She told the police and they were nice and said it wasn't my fault and that this man had been exploiting me. I am glad I told. East Ayrshire Child Protection Committee, 100 Stories, Child Sexual Exploitation. East Ayrshire Child Protection Committee, 100 Stories, Child Sexual Exploitation. I met Gary at a friend's party. I was 14 and had lied to my mum about going out. She thought I was staying at my friend Stacey's house but we both were going to the party. I was in second year at the high school and Gary and his friends were in fourth year. We were both so chuffed that the big boys had asked us to the party. We didn't really drink but when we got there, Gary and his friends kept giving us vodka and beer. I went to the toilet to look for Stacey and couldn't find her. I went into one of the rooms and Gary was there with another friend. Stacey was on the bed. They got us to touch each other while they took photos. They said that it was a laugh. We didn't really want to. But they were still giving us drink and also they said we were so gorgeous that we could have been models. We did it. and Gary seemed so pleased with us. Stacy was with the other guy Mark who started kissing her. Gary was so nice and kept going on about how beautiful I was and had a great body and figure. At school on Monday, Gary, Mark and their friends came up to Stacy and me and hung out with us at the break time. The other girls in our class were so jealous. The next weekend, we went to one of Gary's friends' houses. I didn't like this guy. He was a bit creepy and wasn't at school. He was about 20. After some beers, Gary said it was time for the camera again. Stacy and me went a bit further this time cause we were encouraged and egged on by Gary and Mark. They were making us laugh. The other guy was in the room, and I didn't like it, so just kept looking at Gary. They asked us to do stuff that we weren't sure of, and got us kissing each other and doing stuff to each other. Gary said it was really turning his on, and Mark said the same to Stacy. I don't think we would have done it if we hadn't been drinking and if we hadn't been trying to please Gary and Mark. Later, when we had got dressed and were having another beer, the guy whose house it was gave Gary some money. I asked why, and Gary said that he owed him the money. On Monday at school, Gary and Mark didn't come over to us. When Stacy and me went up to them, they said they were busy. Gary didn't reply to any of my text. They were like that all week, and then on Friday didn't ask us out with them at the weekend. Stacy phoned Mark on Saturday and a girl answered his phone and then laughed when she heard Stacy's voice. East Ayrshire Child Protection Committee, 100 stories, child sexual exploitation. East Ayrshire Child Protection Committee, 100 stories, child sexual exploitation. Roisin and Amanda became friends in February 2011, although both have attended the same secondary school in Glasgow since first year. Roisin has stated that Eleanor got Amanda into meeting men online, and then Amanda tried to get Roisin into it. Roisin stated that last summer she and Amanda met Ryan, 28Y/O, and his friend, no name given, who was 24Y/O. Amanda met Ryan on Facebook and agreed to meet him. She told Roisin to bring some condoms. Roisin went with Amanda to meet an older man, Ryan, and his friend whom she had met on the internet. The friend whom Roisin had sex with was 24. Amanda still sees Ryan, who is 28. Bernardo's worker explored with Roisin why someone in their 20s might want to meet someone much younger. Roisin stating she can't understand it either, as they would have nothing to talk about. Roisin clearly suspicious of Ryan's continued contact with her friend. Roisin visibly upset remembering meeting the males, stating she wouldn't have gone through with it if it hadn't been for Amanda. Roisin feeling she would still be a virgin if she had not become friends with Amanda and would not drink as much. Roisin raising concerns about Amanda as she is continuing to meet men she meets on Facebook. Roisin has recently disclosed that Amanda had been raped when she was 13 following meeting adult male, from online. East Ayrshire Child Protection Committee, 100 stories, child sexual exploitation. East Ayrshire Child Protection Committee, 100 stories, child sexual exploitation. Jessica is 17 years old and has been supported by one of Bernardo's sexual exploitation projects for 2 years. She was just 14 when she became involved with an older group of children, who introduced her to drugs. My mum wasn't around, my dad was drinking and spent most of his time internet dating. And my sister had left home. I got involved with a group of friends outside school. They were older who were drinking and there were drugs, says Jessica. I was already drinking when I met them, but I'd never touched drugs before. There was a lot of peer pressure to get involved. At first it was okay, I could get the money from my dad. But after a couple of weeks, I was getting hooked and there wasn't enough money. My new mates said that it was fine and introduced me to a new boy in the group. They said he fancied me. They said that I should go out with him. I didn't realize what was happening. I was being set up. After I had slept with him, I realized that I'd been used, but it was too late. I ended up hooked on drugs. The need and the want became more and more. Next thing was, he made me sleep with one of his friends to clear a drugs debt. That was only the start of it. When Jessica was just turning 15, the risk signs were already there. She had family problems, was using alcohol and drugs, and was staying out at night. I had so many problems. I really needed my mom, but she'd gone off with another bloke. Dad didn't care. And my sister had gone off and was hardly ever in touch. The drugs seemed like my only escape because I had no one. No one seemed to care for me or be looking out for me. Yes. The situation was frightening, but I didn't know how I could change things, says Jessica. At that point, a Bernardo's worker paid a visit to Jessica's school. She was chosen as part of the group to do a project about the dangers of abusive relationships, how young people could be groomed and the signs to watch out for. The education worker also gave a presentation about the help Bernardo's could offer. Unbeknown to her, Jessica had been identified at school as being a girl at risk of being sexually exploited. No one knew that it had already started. My situation had got more and more frightening. Then one night I was raped at a party. Because I said no to someone my so-called boyfriend had set me up with, as a favor. I didn't know what to do. I was desperate and had nowhere to go. I couldn't go home, I couldn't tell my friends. It was really scary, but I knew I had to do something, and I went to the Bernardo's project the education worker had come from, Jessica says. Luckily there was someone working late and they helped me. I knew that I didn't want to live like this anymore. Even then I knew that the drugs and abuse wasn't my destiny. So I changed it with the project's help. 2 years on, Bernardo's have helped Jessica get a place at college, gain qualifications, and find her own place to live. The days of drugs and abuse are firmly in the past, and she has made her escape thanks to a lot of determination and the support of the project. East Ayrshire Child Protection Committee, 100 Stories, Child Sexual Exploitation. She says, they pick on vulnerable, lonely girls like me. They can almost sniff out the needy, lost girls. The girls looking for love, who crave affection and who are desperate to belong to something, anything. Those words, child sexual exploitation, they makes me shudder, makes my skin crawl. I know that's what happened to me, and there was no way I could recognize it at the time. I was so young and vulnerable. And what was worse, there was no way I could have stopped it on my own, without help and without knowing Bernardo's was there for girls just like me. East Ayrshire Child Protection Committee, 100 Stories, Child Sexual Exploitation. Sophie is 16. The oldest of 6 children, Sophie grew up caring for her mother who suffered from mental health issues and her younger siblings. The family was too proud to ask for help, so Sophie struggled on, lonely and isolated, sacrificing her childhood for others close to her. I had a lot to do at home, and I admit, sometimes it felt lonely. I started to get into trouble at school for attendance, and by the time I was 12, I began falling behind, Sophie says. I suppose I did feel isolated, and I never seemed to get any attention at home. Typical of many young carers, Sophie craved attention, and it was this vulnerability that would make her the perfect target for an abuser, set on finding another child. I was 13 when I met him, and it all seemed so exciting. I was invited to my cousin's 21st birthday party at her house and met this gorgeous guy. He said that he was 18 and we swapped telephone numbers. It seemed so innocent at first, Sophie continues. The guy started calling Sophie regularly. He took her to the cinema, bought her thoughtful presents, daft bits of jewelry, and paid her the attention she had never experienced. Within weeks she was hooked, and there was no going back. At first he really treated me well, and it felt so normal, so right. My mum was getting worried, but I did listen to her. I wouldn't have listened to anyone. I was totally in love, says Sophie. But then he started to change. He got more aggressive and bad things started happening. He'd hit me, but the next day say he was sorry. I'd always forgive him. He started taking me to parties, he'd give me drink and we'd stay out all night. It just got worse, worse, worse. Sophie was just 14. Her relationship with her mother was deteriorating rapidly. She wouldn't hear a word said against her boyfriend, and she had started to go missing for days on end. Sophie was being dragged into a dangerous world of drugs, alcohol and sex. Still a child, lonely and desperately in love, she was powerless to resist. The parties got worse, and so did the way he treated me. At first I'd fight back, but it was really hard. Then one night at a party, he took me and some friends upstairs. He made me do things that I didn't want to do. I was frightened, she says. At first Sophie had told her mother that she was staying over with friends. She regularly got grounded, but would then run away to be with her boyfriend. The grip he had over her life was terrifying. Sophie just couldn't see the danger she was in. Friends told me he was older, that he had a police record, but I wouldn't believe them. I called them a liar. I was still in love with him, she adds. But Sophie's regular episodes of running away hadn't gone unnoticed. Her mother had reported the incidents to the police, and they became concerned at her relationship with the older man. They began an investigation, interviewing Sophie's friends, and then alerted the local Bernardo's Child Sexual Exploitation Project. East Ayrshire Child Protection Committee, 100 stories, child sexual exploitation. From then on, every time I went missing, the project worker came out to me. She told me straight what he was doing and how it was not only me, but my family that was at risk. Gradually, I began to see what was happening. I realized the danger, that I needed to get out, Sophie says. With the help of Bernardo's, Sophie plucked up the courage to tell her abuser to leave her alone. It wasn't easy. He followed her, left messages and intimidated friends. But with the support of Bernardo's and the police, she was able to escape the abuse. Bernardo's helped me realize what was happening, and then they helped me escape. The Worker helped me mend the broken relationship with my mom and get the whole family back on track, Sophie explains. East Ayrshire Child Protection Committee, 100 Stories, Child Sexual Exploitation. Emma came into contact with Barnardos when she was 12 years old and was living in a children's home. She had a history of running away and it was thought that she had been sexually abused. There were concerns that Emma was being sexually exploited on home visits or when she absconded. It soon emerged that her mother had different men coming to the house, who would often be physically abusive to her. The mother was a known prostitute and the Barnardos worker believed that she was putting her daughter on the streets, forcing her to sleep with men for money. From the age of 8 or 9, her mother had taken little responsibility for her. However, despite this, Emma still loved her mother, felt protective towards her and would put herself in danger to protect her mum. On the occasions that Emma ran away from the care home, she would always head for her mother, even though her flat was being used for adult prostitution. Once at home, Emma would give the different men her mobile number, or go off with them, so that they would leave her mother alone. She was putting herself at risk, but she confided in her Barnardos worker that she just wanted to see her mum. Emma just wanted to be part of a family, to be loved, to be treated as a child. However, through working with Barnardos, Emma finally came to understand that by running away, she was risking her life. She realized that she couldn't live with her mother, because despite how much she loved her, the mother would put her on the streets. Emma is now 14 and for the first time in years, is attending a specialist school regularly. She has discovered that she really enjoys doing well and talks enthusiastically about doing karaoke with friends, or her new teachers, in fact all the normal things 14-year-olds chat about. East Ayrshire Child Protection Committee, 100 Stories, Child Sexual Exploitation. East Ayrshire Child Protection Committee, 100 Stories, Child Sexual Exploitation. Zoe was known to social work services all of her life and started having a drink problem when she was just 11 years old. Growing up against a chaotic background where her mother was an alcoholic and in violent relationships, Zoe used alcohol to block out the world. Before long she began running away from home at the time, not realizing the danger. No one really cared about me, I don't think they noticed if I didn't come home. I didn't like it when Mom's boyfriend was around, I suppose I got scared. So I started going missing for a few nights. I was 11. Then I met this boy, he was 17 and really paid me a lot of attention. He let me stay in his house and I thought he loved me. Then he forced me to have sex. I didn't want this to happen, I said no, says Zoe. Zoe's drink problems accelerated and her boyfriend introduced her to drugs. Before long, she had stopped attending school and was self-harming by cutting herself. Eventually Zoe was placed in secure accommodation, but it was only a temporary measure. The missing episodes continued, and when Zoe was 14 a friend introduced her to yet another older man. He was 35 years old and quickly realized the youngster's vulnerability. He'd pick me up and take me to loads of different places to meet his friends. Sometimes we'd go with other girls. At first it was all right, Zoe adds. Although she didn't know it, Zoe was being groomed. After 3 months her new boyfriend started getting violent. He'd punch and kick her. Then he'd demand sex and didn't appear to care that he hurt her. Zoe couldn't make him stop. Then one day she was taken to one of the regular flats and he told her to have sex with his friends. Isolated and frightened, Zoe said no way, but when her boyfriend threatened to beat her, she was forced to do as she'd been told. This was how the pattern of sexual exploitation started. It happened more and more, different towns, different flats. Often she was not alone, other girls were being used too. But Zoe's behavior and constant missing episodes had raised concerns with social services, and at this point Bernardo's became involved. Within 3 months her missing episodes had dropped from several episodes every week, to 1 or 2 per month. Gradually she came to realize that she was not to blame for her own abuse. There had been a complex process of grooming and sexual exploitation. Today Zoe is back in education. She's stopped running away, self-harming, and has set herself life goals. For many these would seem small steps, but for Zoe her life has been completely turned around. Today Zoe has just passed her maths and English exams and has applied for a college place to continue her studies. She's moved away from the men who abused her and finally feels safe. The best thing was just having someone to talk to, she says. Thanks to the Bernardo's staff, I went back to college and have a place to live, and now my life is back on track. East Ayrshire Child Protection Committee, 100 Stories, Child Sexual Exploitation. East Ayrshire Child Protection Committee, 100 Stories, Child Sexual Exploitation. Pamela is an 18-year-old young person who was referred to the service through the local area social work team. Pamela has a diagnosis of a genetic disorder which was assessed by social work as placing her at a functioning age closer to 16. Pamela had recently given birth to a child as a result of an exploitative relationship with an older male she met online. The male posed as 20 years old in his online persona and developed an online friendship with Pamela prior to meeting her. When Pamela met with the male, she agreed to go with him to his car to help him with his laptop, despite him being significantly older. Pamela and the male were in contact for a number of months before the relationship was terminated by the male upon learning of Pamela's pregnancy. There were concerns about Pamela's capacity to assess risks, her desire to reconnect with the male, and subsequent long-term child protection concerns. Pamela had experienced a considerable amount of trauma and disadvantage throughout her life and in her relationships. This appeared to impact her sense of self-worth and confidence. She expressed feeling at fault for her experiences and was initially protective of the older male. A Bernardo's service worked with Pamela to help Pamela to develop an understanding of exploitation and the process of grooming. She was also able to think critically of the older male's motivation, and understand her own experience through this lens. This learning was incorporated into a wider understanding of how to identify and respond to risky situations, both online and in person. Pamela also recognized her struggles with confidence, and the impact this had on her autonomy and ability to assert her rights. The service therefore additionally provided work around confidence in order to boost Pamela's sense of capacity and autonomy, and reduce Pamela's vulnerability to exploitative relationships. Bernardo's also attended the child protection meetings for Pamela's child, providing advocacy and support to Pamela throughout this process. East Ayrshire Child Protection Committee, 100 Stories, Child Sexual Exploitation. East Ayrshire Child Protection Committee, 100 Stories, Child Sexual Exploitation. Vicky was referred to the Barnardo's service by CAMS, who had become aware some time ago that there had been incidents of Vicky posting sexual images online. This had been discovered by her mom, who had since restricted her home computer use. Social work services had become involved at mom's request, but the case was then closed after assessment that risk had been removed. CAMS remained concerned that Vicky had a lack of awareness of the exploitative nature of relationships that she had had online and was still vulnerable to further exploitation. The service accepted the referral and began weekly sessions at the service base, focusing on the following outcomes: knowledge of sexual health strategies, able to identify abusive/exploitative behavior, recovery from sexual abuse/exploitation, able to describe safety strategies, reduction in level of risk/harm, reduced association with risky adults/peers, remains in regular contact with the service, awareness of own rights and those of others. During the course of initial work, Vicky disclosed an unhealthy peer relationship which had led to further face-to-face sexual exploitation, and it was apparent that she was still at significant risk of resuming online relationships. The service made a child protection referral to social work services, and we continued to support Vicky during the subsequent investigation. The service progressed work with Vicky, supporting her to identify the grooming process of intentionality and control that she had experienced in her relationships online. In time, Vicky's perception of these as being loving relationships changed to where she was slowly able to acknowledge and disclose incidents of blackmail and coercion. Work was undertaken to inform Vicky of the nature of perpetrator behaviors, the grooming process, and also the concept of exploitation as abuse, with focus on Vicky's right to protection and safety. But also included input where Vicky was able to identify her motivations for seeking out adult relationships, using the time and space to explore her sense of self, her identity including sexual identity, and to articulate her views on her own experiences. By the end of contact, Vicky considered she was still at some risk of reaching out for adult relationships, but that this was minimal. She felt she had an increased confidence in managing her own emotional needs, and with the additional support that she was now receiving from various services, she now had increased protective factors and was participating in age-appropriate activities that met her intellectual needs and had focus for her future. East Ayrshire Child Protection Committee, 100 Stories, Child Sexual Exploitation. East Ayrshire Child Protection Committee, 100 Stories, Child Sexual Exploitation. Christopher was referred to a Barnardo's service by his social worker when he was 17 years old. He had been looked after since he was very young and had recently suffered a breakdown in his long-term foster placement, after he had made an allegation against an older male neighbor. Christopher stated that he no longer felt safe in this placement. Christopher had suffered significant abuse and trauma which resulted in him being accommodated from an early age. He had ongoing mental health issues and was struggling with both his sexuality and his gender, and spent a significant amount of time living under a female identity. In addition, there were significant concerns regarding Christopher's use of alcohol and drugs, sexual health and risk-taking behaviors and his relationships, both with peers and adults. He was referred to the service as workers were very concerned, as he was going out and frequenting bars in the city center and coming back to his accommodation heavily under the influence. He had also been found by the police in the city center unconscious on several occasions and has also disclosed several incidents where he alleged that he had been sexually assaulted. Christopher continuously stated that he did not believe that he was at any risk and that he could not understand why workers were concerned about him. The service met with Christopher over a period of 4 months. Initial contacts were very short and occurred fortnightly. However, as Christopher got to know and trust workers, we slowly managed to increase the frequency of these contacts to weekly. During the time that we worked with Christopher, his accommodation broke down, which resulted in him becoming homeless and living in unstable accommodation. We tried to link him into another Bernardo's project that could support him to access more suitable accommodation. But Christopher was reluctant to meet any more workers and did not follow through with this. More information emerged regarding his involvement in sexual exploitation, although Christopher repeatedly stated that he was not at any risk and did not want to acknowledge or discuss this part of his life. His use of alcohol and drugs increased and his mental health deteriorated, and he eventually withdrew from engaging with the service and other workers in his care plan. Christopher acknowledged that the service allowed him to be himself and was honest and upfront with him regarding his behaviors and experiences. We also consistently challenged him regarding some of his behaviors. This ensured that Christopher was always aware of what he could expect from the service and that workers were there for him if he wanted to talk about anything. We also helped him to put his views across at his meetings, although this became increasingly difficult due to Christopher's own uncertainty regarding who he was, how he felt and what he wanted to happen. The service currently has no contact with Christopher, although we continue to keep a lookout for him through street work. It is understood that he is engaging with some workers and has been referred to a suitable accommodation project. East Ayrshire Child Protection Committee, 100 Stories, Child Sexual Exploitation. East Ayrshire Child Protection Committee, 100 Stories, Child Sexual Exploitation. Emily is 15 years old. Emily lives with her mother and her younger brother. Emily's mother is a single parent. Domestic abuse had been present in previous relationships, including Emily's father. Emily and her brother had also been hit by partners in the past and when they were young had witnessed domestic violence and a sexual assault of their mother within the family home. Emily's mother was no longer in a relationship, although she was diagnosed with depression and also continued to use alcohol as a coping mechanism, drinking most evenings. Emily's relationship with her mother appears to be more of a volatile friendship than a daughter, and the levels of supervision, rules, routines and boundaries have not been appropriate to Emily's age and stage of development for a number of years. Social work did not currently have this as an open case. Emily's school attendance has been poor for a number of years and school have made many attempts to work with Mum in regard to this, but Mum does not follow through with meetings or strategies. Emily bought a BlackBerry Messenger phone and through BBM has been indiscriminate in who she contacts and who has her own contact details. Emily's mother has not been monitoring who and where Emily is in the evenings, and in the last year Emily has increasingly been hanging out with slightly older friends, drinking and attending parties. On a couple of occasions Emily engaged in underage sexual activity while attending these parties with a 16-year-old boy. Later Emily would also disclose that she was sexually assaulted by an older male while drunk at a party, but that she did not report this. Emily started going out with a boyfriend at school who was her own age. They used their mobile phones for sexting, initially exchanging text with sexual content, but then also exchanging pictures. Emily sent her boyfriend a number of sexually explicit photos of herself. The boyfriend showed these photos to friends of his and then also sent them on. Emily split up with him following this. However, due to the bullying this instigated within the school, Emily rarely attended school over a number of months and began to drink more and hang out with older young people in the community. Emily began to be sexual activity with a number of these friends who at the time she did not think were exploiting her, but is now aware that she was being groomed. Emily began attending parties on her own and has now disclosed that on a couple of occasions when drunk she slept with not only her boyfriend but also a friend. In addition to this, Emily was being increasingly targeted either for bullying through BBM by peers or sexual advances by older friends. Due to the complete disengagement of Emily from school and the lack of response from her mother, school put in a child concern report to social work. Initial home visits felt that the case was not sufficiently concerning to be opened and that school community support services should be able to engage Emily back in school. However, this was unsuccessful. And Emily's brother also disclosed concerns to a guidance teacher that he was worried about his sister. This led to a further child concern report and referrals to specialist CSE and alternative to education resources. East Ayrshire Child Protection Committee, 100 Stories, Child Sexual Exploitation. It took both these services a number of months to build a relationship with Emily and for the above information to be disclosed so that she could be supported with all of these issues. Emily has not returned to school but is hoping to now attend college and is engaged in group work with other young people looking at issues around CSE and work they can do to raise awareness of the risks for other young people. East Ayrshire Child Protection Committee, 100 Stories, Child Sexual Exploitation. Angela and Sarah are aged 12 and 14 and both live at home. They do not have good relationship with their family or peers and do not engage well at school. They were first approached by Bernardo's CSE service late at night in town when they were seen approaching adult men and asking for cigarettes. They also said they were stranded and couldn't get home. When it became apparent that these jaunts into town were not just one-off incidents, the team invited the girls to the Bernardo's office to discuss risk-taking behavior. By this time both girls had stopped going to school. Angela stopped attending after reporting that she had been sexually assaulted in the playground, but no action had been taken. Sarah didn't want to go to school, embarrassed about only having 2 tops. She had little access to basic needs such as food and clothing. Her elder sister had been arrested on 2 occasions for shoplifting food. Bernardo's staff had contact with the girls 2/3 times a week, and as their confidence in town grew, so did their risk-taking behavior such as running away from home and involvement in sexual exploitation. They were regularly supported to return home, and the project Workers gained the trust of the girls, which enabled them to gather more and more information as they opened up. As it turned out, Angela had a very bad relationship with her mother. When she disclosed that her dad had sexually abused her, her mum refused to believe her. Sarah's relationship with her dad fell apart when she found out he had lied about her mom's death. Risk indicators for the girls included going missing for long periods of time, and their parents didn't know where. They had no awareness of their rights or the risks associated with their behaviors. They received little communication or warmth from their family, used alcohol inappropriate to their age, did not attend school, and both had histories of abuse and neglect. East Ayrshire Child Protection Committee, 100 Stories, Child Sexual Exploitation. East Ayrshire Child Protection Committee, 100 Stories, Child Sexual Exploitation. James is 15 and has grown up in a chaotic home prior to being accommodated. James' mom suffers from significant mental health difficulties, and has made several suicide attempts, on occasion when James has been present. James has experienced violence from his dad, stepdad and other partners of his mum during his time living at home. James has also witnessed domestic violence against his mom, and as the oldest son has tried to protect both her and his siblings from this violence. James became accommodated in a local authority children's unit following a significant incident of violence from one of his mom's partners. James is very protective of his mom, and there are indications of a codependent relationship between them. James will sometimes share that he feels he hasn't done well to protect his family. James' mum will still seek James' support in times of crisis. James was referred to the service following missing episodes and the disclosure of rape. James identifies himself as gay, and his experiences of sexual exploitation began age 15. Through making contact with males in social networking and dating sites online. James is quite shy and has difficulty in developing relationships. He felt it would be easier to meet someone just like him. Someone who wanted to meet other people, maybe a partner, but who like him struggled to start up conversations. Initial contacts involved online chat and trying to get to know these males. James' online profile stated he was older, otherwise he wouldn't have been able to post on the sites. However, James was always upfront in chat that he was only 15 years of age. Some of these conversations progressed to James being invited to meet up face-to-face. Meetings have taken place in various places, hotels, car parks /parked cars, and at houses in locations across the country. All of these males have been adults ranging from 20 45 years of age and have been aware of James' age at the time of contact. Unfortunately, James has difficulties in assessing risk and judging character, a result of his significant early relationships, causing him to be vulnerable to the skills of perpetrator males in grooming him. James feels now that he has been naive to have believed that these males wanted to have equal relationships rather than the abusive, exploitative relationships he has experienced. James has been raped, contracted STIs, and has been hospitalized as a result of infection. His esteem has been damaged with increased feelings of rejection, and he now has an increased sense of vulnerability. James is slight in build and presentation and was told by one of the males who abused him that what appealed to him was James' vulnerable childlike appearance, adding he looked like a 12-year East Ayrshire Child Protection Committee, 100 Stories, Child Sexual Exploitation. Since working with the service, James has an increased awareness of the motivations of these adult perpetrators to have power and control over him. James is now working with supports to build positive pro-social relationships into his day-to-day experiences, support in reducing his feelings of isolation and inadequacy, and increasing his opportunities to increase his self-regard and his confidence. The work is supporting his recovery from child sexual exploitation and developing his skills and confidence to be able to engage in equal relationships in the future. East Ayrshire Child Protection Committee, 100 Stories, Child Sexual Exploitation. One of Raven Kaliana's earliest memories is being taken to a family portrait studio by her parents, at around the age of 4. The studio was in the basement of a department store in a town 50 miles from their home. Once they had arrived, they waited for another couple to arrive with their own child. "Would you like to have your picture taken with this cute little boy?" her mother asked. Before the parents left the kids with the photographer and retired to the cafe upstairs. But while they sat eating ice cream, the images being made in the studio down below were far from happy family portraits. Raven and her companion had just been sold into the child abuse industry. It was to be the beginning of a 15-year ordeal, which saw Raven regularly trafficked by her parents and other members of an organized crime ring from her home in a middle-class suburb in the American Northwest to locations all over the US and abroad. In her teens, the crimes were often perpetrated in Los Angeles, where many film studios provided ample opportunity for the underground child abuse industry in the 70s and 80s. Her father, precariously self-employed after losing his teaching job, was violent towards her younger brother, but since she had become the family breadwinner, Raven was granted a peculiar status. "My father always favored me because I brought in the money. I was supporting our whole family. My younger brother was jealous because of my dad's special treatment of me. My father was also quite affectionate towards me, whereas he would beat my brother to a pulp. Although he did hit me, he wanted me to stay intact because the less scars I had, the more I was worth." Inevitably, as she grew older, Raven's value to her abusers decreased, and subsequently, the kinds of films she was required to take part in became more extreme and violent. Yet from a young age, she had learned from her parents to rationalize and deny what was going on within the family. It's the same way that someone who has a problem with alcohol will rationalize their behavior. "It's only this many drinks. It's before noon, but, oh, well, just today. I remember my mother saying things like, oh, they'll never remember it like people do when they get their baby's ears pierced. I told myself that my parents meant well, that what I was going through was what was necessary to help my family. It was paying our mortgage." East Ayrshire Child Protection Committee, 100 Stories, Child Sexual Exploitation. East Ayrshire Child Protection Committee, 100 Stories, Child Sexual Exploitation. Rosie lived with her mum and stepfather. Her stepfather used to hide a camera in the toilet and watch Rosie from the age of 10. When she was 12, he started to come into her room at night when her mum was out and abused her. When she was 13, he took her once a week swimming, and he then took her for a treat afterwards to an ice cream cafe. He asked her every time what flavor she wanted of ice cream and bought her the double cone she wanted. On the way back from the ice cream she had to perform a sex act on her stepfather. He said the ice cream was payment for this. East Ayrshire Child Protection Committee, 100 stories, child sexual exploitation. East Ayrshire Child Protection Committee, 100 stories, child sexual exploitation. Rebecca's story. It started when I was 11, the grooming. It was older men who lived in the area, Rusholme, Moss Side. Then when I was 12, 13, and 14, that's when there was abuse. By the time I was 16, there had been more than 50 men who had exploited or abused me. I'm telling this because we need to stand up and speak up about this. This is the future of our children. Because of what happened, I have trust issues with men, depression, it's always on your brain. I didn't have a good education. But I know I want to fight against child sexual exploitation. Our project is called RAIN because we want to be queens in our community, take a stand and speak up. As a child, I had problems at home. My brother was always in trouble, my dad wasn't around, and my mom had problems with alcoholism. I used to wag school a lot. A lot of hanging around, chilling on the streets. But all the people I should have been chilling with, like my friends, were in school. I was more likely to bump into older people, and they obviously knew I was vulnerable and kind of encouraged me and changed my mind about doing things. It was more fun than going to school. Then on the few times I went in, it was like my classmates were lower than me. I was a big girl because I was chilling with these men. Teachers didn't want me there, they put me in another room with different work. So that put me off even more. They had a responsibility to ask where I was when I wasn't in school. But they didn't. I've learned there are a lot of older men out there with an interest in young girls. I guess you're an easy target, vulnerable. The men I met, it was people you wouldn't expect to be looking for young people. They can buy nice things for you. Every young girl wants to feel older, and an older person has the funds to get you things. Cigarettes, alcohol, and drugs. It's hard to say, but there were more than 50 before I was 16. They weren't connected. There would be someone who worked in a shop, someone you met on a bus, someone walking down the street with a dog, or you'd bump into them. At first it was just conversation, but then you'd exchange numbers. It would go from there. They encouraged me to take things, drugs. I thought it was right to because they said it was right. It takes away your innocence, your childhood. I was young and I wanted someone to be there for me, someone to trust, someone to look after me, buy things for me and treat me like an adult. There were lots of people ready to do